Okay, so some background. Yeah, let me know if anything on the sound is still off. So I guess background for this workshop, it's kind of a funny one, but this was an idea I've been thinking on for a while. Just working with Lightning in a bunch of different ways. I mean, my big blocker when I was starting out was, how do I interface with my Lightning node? What does that look like? What are the steps to doing that? And there was nothing that really laid it out very clearly, at least nothing that I could find at the time. And so, you know, a lot of these workshops we build little apps with Lightning and just basic Lightning functionality. And so I wanted to summarize a lot of what I've learned on just some like easy to set up go-to methods for talking your Lightning node and doing basic things like paying invoices, creating invoices, seeing your balances, and then, I mean, really anything else, because once you're talking to your Lightning node's interface, the whole rest of the interface is open for you to use, and it's kind of an invitation to dig deeper. So I think it's a cool framing. And so, yeah, 3 easy ways to interface with LND. I have the complete, so the slides are right here in this link. I realize you can't totally see that there. So it's tinyurl.com/plebdevs-lnd-interfacing. So that's a slideshow, and it's got all of the code in there, and we also have a link to a completed project. So maybe even this project is a little bit beyond like your current capabilities, but you know, I made it as kind of a reference, so it's something that you can always return to, a reference for 3 different easy ways that you might copy over to set up your Lightning connection in your own app. So yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so overview of what we're going to be going through here. I mean, first of all, I've got the completed project here at the bottom. So I'm going to be creating everything from scratch with you, and hopefully it'll go well. If anything goes wrong, I'm just going to cheat and pull up my already completed project that's right here. So, you know, live demos. But this is overview, so we're going to talk about the difficulties of interfacing with a Lightning node. We're going to talk a little bit about networking over Lightning, which will hopefully give you a better mental model of how, I guess, just apps and the Lightning network are able to interoperate together, how they communicate together. We'll keep it pretty high level with that. We're going to talk, just kind of mention the different Lightning implementations and interfaces and kind of frame them through our plebdev perspective of what's easiest to work with, what does this let us do. And then we're going to set up a simple Lightning development environment with Polar. You might have done that before. If not, you will find it very, very cool and very easy to run a local Lightning network. And then we're going to set up our NextJS app, and we're kind of just going to go through. I've got a bunch of slides of code. You know, there's a decent amount of boilerplate there that we're going to be pasting in, but in general, it's pretty simple. We're going to have the ability to get our balance, to pay an invoice, and to create an invoice. It's just going to be these 3 basic functions, but we're going to replicate them across the 3 different interfaces that we're going to use. So the REST interface, your traditional API interface, and then gRPC, and then WebLN. So should be pretty clean to go through, and let me just want to turn this down a little bit. Okay, so let's get into it. So the difficulties interfacing with the Lightning node. So if I boil this down, I try to just boil it down to what are the 3 things, and I try to remember what I was feeling just a few years back when I was first trying to build Lightning apps. And so I think it boils down to these 3 things. How do I run a node? Where do I find the interface to my node, right? How do I even get there? And then once I get there, how do I use it? So these were hard questions for me to answer on my own at the time, but we're gonna go over this. So a bit more detail on difficulties of interfacing with a Lightning node. Why is it challenging? And so at the top here, I think this top reason is one of the main reasons, assuming you have a node running and everything. Lightning nodes, they natively use TCP, stands for Transmission Control Protocol for communication. And so this is just a low-level protocol that's a part of the internet stack, right? So most modern web applications are built using HTTP or HTTPS. Like this is our traditional API call flow. And so this is a cool diagram here that just kind of shows you where TCP is in the stack. We've got HTTP, which is really the highest abstraction of where, you know, this is where me, the developer, I'm interacting with HTTP, and then it will travel down the stack before it crosses over the internet through all of these different protocols. It's kind of crazy, but the Lightning nodes themselves, they just use this TCP layer for communication. And you know, there's different considerations and nuances to using TCP, but in general, I just like to say, as a developer, practically, TCP, it feels kind of like WebSockets. You sort of open up a subscription and information streams in and you can stream information out. Versus like your traditional HTTP API, which is like, I make a request, you give me a response. It's kind of a back and forth. So, you know, the complexity of the Lightning Network protocols, this is something that overwhelms people when they're getting started. You know, they feel like they need to fully understand the Lightning protocol in order to, you know, start calling methods on the Lightning node. And that's not necessarily true. Limited documentation or resources. This is less true. There's a lot better resources, even just in the last few years. But it's still something like, how does the new person find it? You know, if you just go Googling about Lightning, you might not find the best developer resources, especially to get started. And you know, there's security implications. Like, people don't know, like, maybe they have a Lightning node that they're running, but they're like, well, should I be developing with this? I mean, should I be writing my terrible code to talk to my, like, real Lightning node that's holding my own money? Maybe not, right? So these are some of the concerns, some of the high-level concerns, and then more detailed concerns that make it difficult for people to first start interfacing their Lightning node. And we actually have one tool that we're going to use today, Polar, which is going to solve these three problems, at least from a local development standpoint for us. So that's really cool. Okay, so a bit about networking over Lightning. So we talked about TCP. So what is happening here on the Lightning nodes? I mean, I guess I'm assuming that you have some kind of prerequisite knowledge to Lightning here. But a lot of people, they don't know how Lightning nodes actually communicate between each other. And so, you know, they're using TCP. Before you can open up a channel with someone, you actually need to peer with them first, is what they call it. Basically make a connection over TCP, and you need to do some chatting and some agreements before that channel can be opened. And a lot of this happens in the background from us as app devs, from our perspective. But you know, it's important to know all of this is done over TCP. So communications, opening channels. We've got the Gossip protocol that, you know, talks about channel creation, closure, capacity of certain channels, and then of course routing payments through the network. Right? There's this Gossip that is happening. It's all over TCP. And so, you know, TCP, it's this lower level protocol. It's more simple. I guess the security implications around it maybe are more simple. So there's good reason why, you know, Lightning nodes use this. But from our perspective as app developers, it can make things kind of hard. How often do we write, you know, TCP interfaces in our web apps? Almost never. So this is a problem that we're gonna be able to address with this workshop. Okay, yeah, a bit more about networking over Lightning. So challenges with TCP for web apps. Kind of mentioned this, but you know, the mismatch between HTTP and TCP, that makes it difficult. And we talked a little bit about security aspects, but you may recognize this TLS. We have with Lightning, we have these TLS certs, which you're always like, what is that? Why do I need that to talk to my Lightning node? You know, this is just a classic TCP security protocol, basically. And so this kind of goes into some of the considerations with connecting to a Lightning node, but we're actually going to be able to surpass that, or usurp it for right now, basically with the methods that we're going to use. Okay, so a bit about the different Lightning implementations. So this workshop is over LND, and the reason why I think it's just the most simple first implementation to start working with. It's also the most popular, so it stands for Lightning Network Daemon. It's the most popular and widely used. It's developed by Lightning Labs, written in Go, and yeah, and they have pretty good documentation actually. We're gonna peek into the documentation a little bit later. And so Okay, it's worth mentioning, we're talking about interfacing, talking to the Lightning nodes. All of these different implementations, they have different interfaces. And they support different kinds of interfaces that we can use. And so this is always a consideration. Like LND has a REST interface, so HTTP. It has a gRPC interface as well. But like Core Lightning, for example, Core Lightning just recently got a REST interface. They didn't always have one, right? So you had to use RPC or gRPC as your interface, and so that was a limitation. I've never worked with Eclair. I actually don't know what interfaces Eclair has, but I'm assuming they have RPC. And then LDK, I mean, is one of the most powerful Lightning implementations, but it requires the most amount of setting up. It's not even just like you run LDK and you connect to it. You actually need to do some coding and some configuring to even set it up to be ready. So I think that you could almost look at this as like a stack of like how difficult is it to start working at this implementation as an app dev. And I think LND is the easiest, followed by Core Lightning, Eclair, and LDK. But yeah, I definitely want to be covering Core Lightning more in the near future. We've done a few workshops, but Core Lightning is very powerful, so we're going to be getting into that more in the future. But for right now, sticking with LND, a straightforward kind of first implementation for us to start playing with. Okay, setting up a local Lightning developer environment with Polar. So this is our first interactive piece of the workshop, I guess. So you'll need to install Polar Lightning at polarlightning.com here if you don't have it. And you'll also need Docker Desktop. And so Docker Desktop, you don't necessarily need to know what that is right now, but essentially Docker is a tool that allows us to take full entire code bases and isolate them in an environment that we can easily share around. And so Polar runs on top of Docker because Polar is a very specifically configured local Lightning environment, and it needs to run the same every time with the same configurations, the same packages, and their same versions. And so it's why they have it run on top of Docker. So very simply, I mean, all you need to do is open Docker Desktop and wait for it to start. So you just install it, it works on any OS, and open it. And then once you also have Polar installed, you'll be able to just simply open Polar, and it should work for you. And so I will jump over now. So these screenshots, they basically show you just how to set up a basic Lightning network, but I'm going to go through that with you. So I actually have one here, but let's delete it. Let's start over from scratch, because that's always fun. Okay, cool. So this is the screen we see. Let's get started. I'm going to create a Lightning network. Let's call it interfacing. So we're going to be working with LND, so I'm just going to do 3 LND nodes here. Keep it pretty simple. And then, of course, we'll always keep our one Bitcoin Core node because Lightning runs on top of Bitcoin Core, which Polar makes very clear with its UI here. So cool. So we have our 3 fresh Lightning nodes. And so I guess if you don't know about Polar, if this is your first time using Polar, I mean, wow, I could have a whole workshop about this. There's a lot to say about Polar, but very simply, what you need to know is it's all running inside of Docker. It's an isolated environment. And this is actually running on what's called regtest for Bitcoin and Lightning. And so regtest is a fake and local network, basically. It's a fake and local Bitcoin network for you to use. You may have heard of testnet on Bitcoin. Testnet is actually a fake and global network on Bitcoin. And then, of course, mainnet is the real shebang, the real Bitcoin. But with regtest, it's cool. We can basically start from block 0. We're starting our own Bitcoin, our own Lightning, and it essentially has the same rules, but we get to kind of move fast and break things and do our development in a much less stringent environment here. So I can hit start, and this will spin up our Bitcoin Core at block height 0, and then our Lightning nodes will turn green here in a second. Cool. And so now each of these nodes, we can click into each of these nodes and we have different tabs. We have some basic info about them. We have a connect tab, which is going to solve our problem of how do we connect to our node. This connect tab makes it easy. And then we have different actions that we can actually do here in the UI, such as creating, paying invoices, and opening channels. So I'm just going to get things started here. We're going to get a little bit of a connected Lightning Network going. I'm going to go over here to Alice. And I'm going to have Alice, first of all, deposit some funds. Just deposit 1 million sats into Alice's node. I'll do the same thing for Bob here, and I'll do the same thing for Carol as well. It'll take a second when we're doing it for the first time. Okay, there we go. And Carol. So they all should have 1 million sats now, and I'm going to have Alice here open an outgoing channel to Bob. Turn in 50k sats. That sounds good. Cool. And now I'm going to have Bob open up to Carol. And we'll finally have Carol loop back around to Alice. And we'll get a little bit of a circular network going here. Cool. And so now these are imbalanced channels, so the liquidity is all sitting on one side, but we can actually route around the full thing. So, you know, Alice doesn't have a direct channel to Carol, but if I go here with Carol, I can have Carol make, let's say, 10,000 sat invoice. I'll copy that, and then I can go over here to Alice, pay invoice, boom. And we actually see, there's too small amount to really see. Let me do a bigger one, 50k. Have Alice pay the invoice. Okay, cool. So we actually see here in the UI, this is the coolest part, my favorite part about Polar. We see here in the UI that the color of these channels are changing as liquidity is shifting. Right? So when we started out and we opened to these channels, they were all one-sided. Alice opens up 250,000 sats to Bob. But Alice is still in full control of those sats, right? She didn't just give them to Bob. She's just opening a liquidity channel. And then the same thing for Bob to Carol, Carol to Alice. So these were these one-sided channels. And now when Alice sent a payment to Carol, she routed this liquidity through, and it's actually slightly rebalanced the channels now, which we see by this color orange. And if we click on the channel, we can see the source balance and the destination balance. Right, so those 60,000 sats that we've sent so far is the destination balance, and then of course that's the rest of the sats from the initial channel opening. Sweet, so some cool, just basic Lightning 101 kind of visualization and setting up a little network here. And so now with this setup, this is going to be our Lightning network that we're going to be using in our app that we create. And specifically, we're going to be connected to Alice. We're going to be using this Connect tab. And so with this in place, I believe we can start getting into setting up the project. So let's check it out. So we did all of this. We made our little Lightning network environment. Okay, let's set up the NextJS app. So what is NextJS? NextJS is a React framework that lets you write both client-side and server-side code in one application. Maybe you haven't worked with NextJS before. That's okay. I'll walk you through it. There's honestly a lot of cool, unique features that NextJS gets you. It basically just lets you write React, but have a more powerful code repository, more powerful environment that lets you do certain things with it. And for our sake today, what we care about in NextJS, the reason that we're using it, is because we have some code that we're going to need to live on the client side, and some code that needs to live on the server side. So, right, the client side, that's my computer right here in front of me. The client is, you know, what runs the app and renders the app. It's the user's personal computer, but the server side code would be the code that would be, you know, running in the cloud or something like that. And so, actually in the Plebdevs backend course, we talk quite a bit about the different environments between, you know, the server environment and the client environment and what that means. But really for us, this just means that on our server-side environment, we might have some secret information that we need to protect. But there's also some packages and libraries that we only have access to on the server-side environment versus the client-side environment. So don't want to confuse you with that too much, but we'll see it in action. But effectively, that's why we're using Next.js here. Is we're going to have kind of an API side, and then we're going to have a client side. Okay, so creating a new Next.js app, you can open up your terminal, and if you have Node and npm installed globally, you'll be able to run this command npx create next app at latest. And you'll see a kind of a flow like this. I screenshot this from my terminal, where I created my next app. What is your project name? I give it a name, and then I selected all of these options. So this can be kind of confusing, these options, but if you just follow what I say here, you'll end up with the same project that I do. And actually, I'm gonna do this right now. So I'm gonna open up my terminal. Next app at latest, and I'll call this LND interfacing workshop. Okay. No TypeScript, yes to ESLint, no to Tailwind, yes I want a source directory, and then no to app router, and no to the import alias. Okay. So this will spin up brand new app. All right. Find this in my files. I'll drag this over and just open it in VS Code here. I can shut this now. Okay, sweet. Here's our fresh, brand new Next.js app. Okay, so I'm going to tell you two simple things about Next.js to get started with it. And I guess these are the two differences between just a regular React app and Next.js. So we have this pages directory, and I'm going to tell you two things about it. So what's cool about the pages directory is that I can have a page. Let's say we had a page that was called Austin for some reason. Austin.js. If I make this file and then, I make a regular React component, kind of like our index.js here, what would happen is when I ran this app, I would be able to go to, localhost 3000/Austin, and then this page would load. So this is called the app router, I believe, or what is it called? I forget, but it basically makes it to where whatever file you name inside of pages here will create a new route. And so that's really simple. And when we do index.js, the route will be nothing. It'll just be a slash. Okay, so that's basically how that works. So we can create new routes by just making new files. And then we also have this API directory. And so inside of pages/API, let me zoom in a little bit. There we go. That's a little better. Inside of pages/API, this is actually the server side of our code. So they have a hello.js here. This is their example little API route. And so what's cool about this is what happens when we deploy this project. The API will get split up from the client side. So the client side and the server side, they need to eventually get split up because they can't both be in the same environment, or it wouldn't be a server. So they get split up at the very end. So we write all of our code, server side and client side, here in one go. And then once we go to run it or deploy it, it gets split up. And we just don't really need to worry about handling two different code repositories. So that's what's cool about it. So we're going to have some stuff here that we're going to write on the server side inside of API, and then some stuff on the client side. Okay, so that's all I'm going to tell you about Next.js. Besides that, we're effectively just going to be writing some pretty simple React code. Okay, so let's install the required packages here. I can just copy this command. You should be able to as well. While I run this, in case you missed it, here is lost my window. Here is where you can find the slides. tinyurl.com/plebdevs-lnd-interfacing. So if you joined a little late, this is where you can find the same exact slides I'm using, which have all of the code. And then it also has the link to the completed project. Okay. Okay, so we are installing our required packages here. I just ran that command. And it looks like it worked. Cool. So, first thing we're going to change here is index.js. I can actually just command everything, and then I'm just going to delete it. We're going to start fresh here from this first slide. So, almost all of the client-side code is going to live inside of index.js here, except for our Lightning methods. So we're going to paste it in a few pieces. So we have our imports at the top, and we have the send modal, which is going to be our modal that pops up for sending, pretty simply. And I'll walk through all of this code. Let's get it all pasted in though. We have receive modal. Copy this in. And then finally, we are going to have a home, which is kind of the main component that gets rendered, the main page that gets rendered here. Cool. Let me format all this. Okay, nice. So we have all of our code here. Let's walk through it pretty simply. We have our imports at the top. We're going to use a QR code. Besides that, everything else here is pretty standard. We have a send modal that pops up when you're sending, and a receive modal that pops up for creating an invoice to receive. And then we have home. And so home renders both the send modal and the receive modal. So all the code is contained here inside of home. And very simply, we can see here from our return, we're showing the balance, and we have a container here with two buttons, send and receive, and they just open up the send and receive modals. It's pretty simple here. We have some state to handle the modals, some state to hold the balance. We have a function here to get the balance, which won't actually work yet. We'll plug that in and get that to work. Very similar thing for receive modal. We have state to handle the amount and the invoice, and there's a message. And then I have a handle submit here to create the invoice. And then a very, very similar thing for send modal. We take in an invoice, and we get a payment message in return. Payment successful, payment failed. So it's pretty standard. We basically just have state to handle the data. We have functions to handle the method for receiving, for sending, for getting the balance, and then we just render it, right? So pretty straightforward. Yeah, thanks for dropping in. As always, this will be recorded. The slides will live forever, and I will be around. If you end up doing this workshop in a month or something like that, you have a question, I'll be around to answer it. Cool. So this is kind of the core of our app. It's in place. Pretty straightforward. We've got some state, we've got some functionality that's not going to be working yet, and then we're returning some HTML. And so we'll run this in a second. Should we run it right now, actually? What do you think? So, let's add the styles. So we're going to add these styles in globals.css. So let me copy that, and I go into styles, and there's globals. We'll just paste over all of this. Cool. And then we'll have some styles to add in home module as well. Cool. So these are just basic styles for the messages and the modal and the text, buttons, stuff like that. It's nothing super fancy. It's a very basic looking UI. Let's see if we can run it actually. So we've installed our packages, so now we can do npm run dev, and this will start our project locally. We'll definitely have some errors, but maybe we can at least see it being rendered. Oh, I have 2 ports being used. 3002. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, so it'll after you run npm run dev, it'll show you the local host that's running on here. So That's what I clicked on right here. Okay, yes, so we get an error immediately, get balance is not defined. Yeah, we'll run this and we'll see the UI in a minute. Once we have our first interface set up. Oh, okay, well we can ignore that. This is what our simple UI looks like. So send and receive, we have a balance, which we're not showing anything yet. Okay, cool, so that's our UI. So let's get into Lightning stuff. We kind of have our basic app set up here. So next, we're going to get into the REST interface. So the REST interface, this is going to be the interface you're probably most familiar with as a web dev. CRUD. Give me a W in the chat if you know what CRUD stands for. That's a API, REST, whatever acronym, one of the many acronyms. So the REST interface, gonna get into setting this up. Oh, my slides aren't working. Okay, there we go. So first of all, here's a link to the LND API docs. I highly suggest you check this out and dig through it. And this is exactly what we're gonna be using to figure out what our methods need to look like. So here's like a screenshot of the channel balance. Let's actually click on this. Oh, I have it pulled up right here. Cool. So these docs are great. It actually shows you two of the interfaces we're going to use here. We have a code sample for JavaScript, for gRPC, and for REST. And so this is where I figured out how to do all of this. And then what's great about this is for each method, right? So this is our channel balance method to see the balance of our channel. With each method, it tells you what you need in the request and what you will get back in the response. And so this request is actually empty, but if I go to like, let's go to another one, send payment sync. So this is one we're going to use later. We can actually see that there is a request. So there's all of these possible properties that you can put in, and the docs here, they explain what each of these properties are, their types, and so it makes it very useful. And we can see here is like an example of a request body, and they make a request with the body and then they get the response. So that's kind of the flow here. It could be a bit much to look at first, but I mean all the information is here for you to dig into. And these examples I'm going to lay out for you are just going to be bare bones simple, just the perfect way to get started. Okay, so let me go back to channel balance. So yeah, anything I show you, I found right here in the LND docs. So definitely dig in. Okay, onward. So we're going to create our first Lightning method here for REST. And so this is going to be on the client side. So remember I was talking about we're going to have some code on the client side, some on the server side. So this is going to be on the client side. So I think we're going to have, yep, 2 screenshots of code for this. We're going to make this new file. So it's going to be source/lightning. So we're going to add a lightning folder. And then we're going to add lnd-rest.js. That's going to be our file. So source, new folder, lightning, then lnd rest.js, and I'm going to paste in this first bit of code. Okay, looks right. And we'll get this second one here, and then we'll walk through this code. Okay, cool. So what this is doing right now is it's actually calling our own API here inside of the NextJS app. So we need to get these methods set up next. So these are actually going to need to live on the server side, which is why we're calling our own API. So this part maybe seems a little wacky, but it makes sense once you understand the limitations that like the REST interface, in order to call it locally, we need to have it on the server side. And so we'll see that in a second. But essentially we're calling our own endpoint that we're going to create, rest/getBalance for getBalance. We're calling our own endpoint for sending a payment. We're calling our own endpoint for adding an invoice. Okay, so let's actually make this folder that we're going to be expecting. So /API/REST. So here's API. Go ahead and keep hello there. And we're going to have REST. And then let's go to the next screenshot where we're going to get into the server-side code. So this is going to be for add invoice. Copy this and then we'll walk through it. Add invoice.js. Okay, cool. And this is the only code that's going to live here. So now we're on our own endpoint. And this is the point where we actually talk to our node through its API interface. And so we're calling this 127.0.0.8081 v1 invoices. What is this? Where did I get this from? Okay, let's jump back into Polar. So here we are in Alice on the Connect tab, and we can see that there's a REST host. So that's it. This is that API endpoint that I need to call to talk to my node. And that's exactly what we're doing right here. And then the API docs tell me where I need to call that particular method, right? So this one is a post to v1 invoices, and of course this is for adding an invoice, or just, you know, we're creating a new invoice. And all we need to pass in is actually a value. Okay, and so really this is just a handler that takes in an API call and then makes an API call and returns you the response of that, which is going to be an invoice. So that's pretty simple, but we have to set up this HTTPS agent, reject unauthorized false. What is all of this garbage? So this is kind of a hack that we need to do to be able to talk from server to server locally. Okay, so this is something that, you know, once you have a real Lightning node, a real non-reg test Lightning node, you'll just be able to delete this. You won't need an agent. You won't need to add this, you know, HTTPS agent or anything like that. Okay, there's one more piece we're missing here, and this is actually the macaroon. So every this is our secret token that gives us the right to call methods on our own Lightning node. So this is something we need is the admin macaroon. So it's our permissions token, and we can go into Polar here, and under Connect, we're going to look for hex tab, and then we see admin macaroon here. I can copy it. We need the hex format of the admin macaroon for Alice. Okay, and so that's just our permissions token to be able to talk to our Lightning node. And so I'm going to take that, and I'm just going to paste it in right here. Normally we wouldn't want to paste in a secret like this. It's just like plain text inside of our code, especially if we're posting it to GitHub, but this is all local, it's all fake, so I'm just doing it to simplify it and make it a shortcut. Cool, so that makes sense. So we're actually going to have very similar functionality for each other method. So let's just go ahead and get that in place so that we can test it really quickly. So this was our server side for add invoice. We're going to have a server side for get balance. It's going to look very similar. So REST get balance.js. Paste this in. Very, very similar, almost exactly the same, just slightly different arguments. Let me get my admin macaroon from over here, and I'll paste it over into get balance. Okie dokie. And then finally, send payment on the server side. Once again, looks almost exactly the same, just different arguments. Send payment.js. And grab that macaroon one more time. Cool. So these are just, I mean, very simply, these are the example requests for sending a payment, for getting your balance, for adding an invoice. So these will work if you put in the correct macaroon, if you put in the correct host, these will work. So let's actually test this out. I need to add an import for this. So we have, let's walk back through this one more quick second, just so we understand it. So we have clients, on the client side, we have this LND rest.js. So this has functions that calls our own API. And then on our own API, we have functions that calls the API of our Lightning node. Okay? So that's what's happening here. So now I can take these functions from the client side and I can import them to use them. And I can do this in index.js. So I'm going to go into index.js and I'm going to say import get balance, and I'm going to add send payment, and then I'm going to have it's actually not send payment, it's pay invoice, and then create invoice. Cool. So this is coming from @/lightning/LND rest, so our client side functions, which will then call our own API. Okay, let's see if all of that works. So back here to our app, we'll reload, and look at this. We have a balance here for Alice, 186,527 sats. Not bad. Okay, and we see here that we're getting console logs that the balance was fetched successfully. Let's see if this works. Let's see if we can use this. So let's send a payment first. Let's have Bob over here. Bob will create an invoice for, let's say, 69 sats. And then we can go and send, paste in the invoice here from Alice of 69, submit it. It says payment successful. And now for the balance to refresh, I actually need to refresh the page, but we should see this balance go down. So 527 to 458, okay, I think that's 69. Sweet, so that seemed to work. We sent some sats to Bob. Let's see if we can create an invoice and have Bob pay it. So create an invoice for 100 sats. We see our little QR code renders here, and then we have the invoice. I can just copy this. And then go, and I can have Bob pay this. Okay, and it worked. It's a real invoice. Oh, I realize you don't see this. It's in the bottom right corner, but it tells me that the payment was successful. So very cool. So we have a little bit of back and forth happening in our app here. Kind of have to call our own API and then use that to call our Lightning Nodes API. So I hope that didn't confuse you. But it's a very straightforward example that we have here now. And we see all of these logs that are coming from the server side, you know, from like, here's the payment we made, we get the pre-image back in it. And so, you know, there's just a world of new information now that once you're talking to your node is now open to you. It's an invitation for you to dig deeper, to understand the Lightning protocol more, a particular Lightning implementation more. Okay, sweet. So that was our app demo with REST. Let's move on, and we've got gRPC next. Okay, so the gRPC interface. gRPC is kind of the chat interface. It's kind of like, if you talk to the real hardcore devs, you know, they'll tell you like, yeah, use RPC, use gRPC, and it's just because gRPC it has this aspect to where the data streams in automatically. If you allow it to, and it streams out automatically if you want it to, versus HTTP where we have to do request, response. It's this back and forth. And a lot of times at the HTTP interface, you need to do something called polling. Perfect example here. Remember when I sent a payment, but my balance didn't update? I had to refresh the page to update my balance. Well, that's just how I have it right now to keep it simple. But traditionally, how you would solve this problem is that I would actually, every 3 seconds or something like that, I would call my balance API endpoint and to check every 3 seconds if my balance is updated. And that's very inefficient. It's called polling, where we need to constantly request, response, just to keep our data up to date. Versus like gRPC, and we go into this more in the Plebdevs backend course, gRPC just allows that data to just stream in and just automatically, update your state. So that's what's cool about it. It's also just a lot more lower level. So yeah, a lot of the more experienced devs will use gRPC. Okay. So gRPC, boy, there's a lot to say about it. Like I said, we go into it more in the Plebdevs course, but RPC stands for Remote Procedure Calls. gRPC is just Google's implementation of it, but it's what everyone uses. Really at a high level, what you need to know is that RPC, it's just a communication protocol. It's mainly used for machine-to-machine communications. It's just a common interface that you'll see. It often uses JSON. You can use it in all of the popular languages, Python, JavaScript, Java. Has streaming support, like I talked about. And it also has these wrapper libraries, which simplify the process of using this communication protocol. Okay, so we're going to get into this. So, the benefits of using a gRPC wrapper library. Well, let's actually step back. Let's step back. I'm going to go into the LND docs here. I can go look at, okay, here's our channel balance method. If I go look at the gRPC code sample for this, it's quite a lot of code. And a lot of this is just, well, there's some stuff here like the macaroon, right? We needed to put the macaroon in before, so you always need to do that. But a lot of the code here is basically just setting up the interface, the gRPC interface for you to use. And you do all of this setup just to have an empty request that you call, right? Channel balance, and then you get the response. It's like, wow, all of that boilerplate just to call one method with nothing, with an empty object. So it's a lot. It can be intimidating for those starting out. So a gRPC wrapper library, which we're going to use, is actually going to abstract a lot of this away and make it a lot more simple. And so that's what this slide here is communicating. So benefits of using a gRPC wrapper library. So we're going to use this library called LND gRPC. We already installed it. And basically this is what a brand new connection is going to look like through this. It's going to be slightly different. We're going to not necessarily need these three pieces of information, but overall it's less code, it's easier to learn. It exposes the full LND API for us via these very simple asynchronous methods. And it allows us to just focus on what is the API, what are the types and the arguments and the params that we need. That's what we want to be focusing on, is how are we talking to our node and what are we doing. We don't want to be focused on all this boilerplate code. So that's what this simplifies. So we looked at an example. This is like making a request for getInfo without a gRPC wrapper. It's all this code. But then getInfo request with LND gRPC. Look at how much more simple this is. It's basically one line of code. Right, so let's get this set up. So just like we did before, we're going to have our client-side file that we're going to create here, lnd-grpc.js. So let's copy this code. And then I'll put this in. This goes below it as well. And this is almost just like our lnd-rest.js. Almost exactly like it. We're calling our own API endpoints once again. We're just calling it on a different route. Right? So the same kind of client-side implementation, but the server-side implementation is going to look a little bit different. So we had our REST folder in the API, and now we're going to have a gRPC folder. We're going to have these same methods inside of it too. So let's see what's next up. So add invoice. Let's start with this, and then I'll walk through it a little more slowly here. Let's see if I can. Okay. invoice.js. Paste this in. Cool. So, once again, we see here that there's a variable that we're going to need to fill in. We'll get to that in a second, but this is going to be our options that allows us to set up our connection. So, we're importing the LND gRPC library. We're going to be passing in these options with this thing called LND connect URI. We don't know what that is yet. And we're going to initialize it. And we're going to get this LND object. And this LND object will allow us to connect in the connect function. And then it'll allow us to call add invoice. Okay. Oh, and this actually isn't, this code snippet is not complete. This is server side for add invoice. I need to go to the next slide and we have a handler, an API handler. There we go. So this is just like the API handler that we had on the REST interface. So what happens is when you call add invoice, we take the body and we call create invoice with it. Create invoice calls connect, so just make sure that we're connected. And then we add the invoice with the value. If we have it, we return it. And then if we get that return, we pass it back to the client side through the API. It's pretty simple. Okay, but now we need to get this piece of information, this LND connect URI. And we can get this in the same exact spot we got before. So let's go to Alice, side of Polar here, connect. And then I see LND connect. And I want to click on gRPC admin macaron UR. Yeah, this one at the top. It's just one big giant string. And I'll paste that in. Cool. And that should now work. Okay, let's add in the other files for getBalance.js and sendPayment.js. Let's go grab the code for this. So we have getBalance on the server side. Once again, this is very, very similar. Connect function. We call it inside of getBalance. We get the balance, and then of course in this next slide we're gonna have the handler. So pretty much the same code. Once again, it's just slightly different arguments, slightly different names. Okay, there we go. Okay, so that is for getBalance. Nothing too special there. Send payment once again. Okay, connect and then pay invoice. And finally the handler for our API endpoint. Format this. Okay, and don't forget we need to grab this LND connect URI and we need to put it in each one of them. I know that some of this code is actually a bit redundant. We're repeating ourselves a lot. You could probably boil it down and simplify it, but I just wanted to make it like these super clear, kind of isolated examples that you could take from. Okay, cool. So let's now test this out. This should just work. We just need to update our imports. Okay, so I had this import for LND REST. Let me copy it. I'm going to comment this out. And now I'm going to change this to LND-gRPC. Cool. And so the same name methods are in there. They're just using a different connection method, gRPC instead of REST. And so now we should be able to go back to our app here. Refresh. Okay, it took a second to spin up there, but we got our balance all the same. We're now using the gRPC interface. let's try and send a payment again. Make sure that it's still functional. So we'll have Bob create an invoice. Let's say 2,400 sats. Oops. Submit that. Okay, payment successful, and our balance goes down. Now let's receive from Bob. Oh, we need to create an invoice first. Let's receive 21 sats. Okay, pay up Bob. There we go. It was successful. And our balance should go up a tiny amount. Yep. Cool. So the gRPC interface, it fully works. Pretty simple overall compared to how these things can go. Yeah, we just needed a connection function that's pretty simple. We needed to make sure that we had the correct state of active. And then we just call add invoice here inside of lnd.services.lightning. And once again, all of this, you can find out how to do it through the LND docs, and you can also look up the documentation for LND gRPC, the library, specifically. And yeah, like I said before, you know, if you check out the new Plebdevs backend course, we go through all of this in much more detail, and get some kind of more time on it. But this is a nice simple example of the gRPC interface. Okay, great. So on to the final interface, the final easy way that we can talk to LND and make kind of a simple wallet. Is WebLN. WebLN is the most different. This is why I saved it for last and why I started with REST and gRPC. REST and gRPC were pretty similar, right? There was a little bit of client side, there was a little bit of server side. With the REST one, we were calling API endpoints. With the gRPC one, we were using our wrapper library and calling a method right on it. With WebLN, it's a little bit more abstracted, but it's actually easier. So what is WebLN? It's a Lightning Network spec that enables communication between web apps and users, Lightning wallets, in a secure way, providing a programmatic and permission interface for payment-related actions. Okay, remember when we were all the freaking way back here. Oh my goodness, how many slides did I put in here? So we were talking about networking over Lightning, and we were saying TCP, TCP, TCP. This is such an issue. Well, this is exactly what WebLN has solved with their interface, is they take care of this interfacing of TCP for you. They abstract it away from you, and they give you this simple interface that they expose through WebLN. So I like this picture here. It's a good analogy that just shows, you know, we have our Bitcoin Lightning Network, our node that we have sitting here locally, and WebLN sits in the middle between our app and our node, and it gives us this provider, this interface that we can use. It's quite simple to set up. So you can find the WebLN docs here, and those will show you all of the methods. That's where I, you know, figured all of this out. Okay, and there's actually one other step. I should have documented it here. I'll add this after the fact. There's one more step. We're going to use Alby as our interface. So WebLN is the generic spec for the interface, but Alby is one of the wallets that provides that interface. There's also Blixt and Breeze. So we're going to use Alby. We're actually going to have Alby connect to our local node. I'm going to show you a cool trick to do this. I figured this out. I was so excited when I did. I'm going to go add a new account. Okay, and I can just connect to other wallets. I can select LND here. And look what it's asking us for. It's asking us for the REST API host and port and our macaroon hex. Well, we know what these are. We know where to get these. Go right into Polar. Select Alice here. Get my REST host and port. And then I can grab my hex admin macaroon right here. And paste it in. Cool. So Alby will act like you can't continue. It'll throw you this error down here because it's a local host. But what we can actually do is if you open this link right here, do I still have no I don't. There's a little link right here. If you open it, it says go back recommended. We're gonna dangerously move forward. And then it's like, what the heck? Gives us JSON object back. What the heck just happened? Close out the window. And we can actually hit continue now. So we just bypassed. Oh no, it's not letting me. Hold on, let me try again. Expected 1 macaroon but got 0. Did I not paste in my macaroon? Continue. Open up. That's weird. Okay, let's try this again. So rest host. There we go, and then macaroon in the hex format. Hex admin macaroon. Continue. Expected 1 macaroon but got 0. Let me clear my local storage for this, maybe. Oh, look at all these LNDs that got created. Wow. Does one of these work? Oh, quota exceeded. Okay. Sorry, folks. 1 second. Delete a few of these. I guess you can't abuse this too much. Okay, web account. Okay, there we go. So let's try this fresh. LND. I think I still have my macaroon hex, yeah. TPS // 18081, I believe. Let me copy this. Probably messed it up. Okay, there we go. What the heck? I guess I had too many local accounts running. Okay, so we were able to use our janky method to trick Albi into thinking that our fake Lightning Wallet is a real one. But okay, so now we have access to our LND node in the Albi extension right here. And we see this number of sats, which is definitely not the number that I have in my real Albi. Can you actually see this when it pops up? I believe you can, yeah, okay. Okay, stepping back. So we connected our Lightning node into Albi now. So now we have access to this interface. And so we're gonna go through this final part of the code to set up this interface. And it's a lot more simple because it's all on the client side versus the REST and the gRPC, which had both a client and a server side application. So I'll copy this first slide and we're gonna have lnd-webln.js on the client. WebLN.js. I'll paste this in, and I'll paste in the next slide, and then we'll walk through it. Okay, sweet. So we have our same functions here: get balance, pay invoice, create invoice. But everything is done right here. So what we first check is if window.webln. So how the WebLN interface works is if you have a browser wallet, something like Albi that supports WebLN, Albi will actually insert this WebLN object inside of your window. And window is just a global object that exists on every browser. And so WebLN gets inserted. So we make sure, okay, is WebLN available? It is. If so, then we get to call these different methods on it. So first and foremost, each of these times we enable it first. We make sure that it's active, that it's enabled, that we're connected to our Lightning node. And then we can call these other methods, window.webln.getBalance. We can call send payment, where we simply just pass in an invoice. We call in make invoice, where we just simply pass in an amount. So it's just very, very easy interface. So all we're doing here is we're making sure that WebLN is on the window. We're enabling it. We're calling the appropriate method with an argument if it has it. And then we're just returning it. You know, like here we need to make sure if we try to pay an invoice, is the pre-image there? Okay, if the pre-image gets sent back to us, we know that it was paid successfully. So that's one extra condition there, but you know, like for make balance is pretty simple. We call it and then we return it. Okay, and this will look a little bit different on our client side. So let's I'm gonna copy this once again, comment it out, but change it to WebLN. The methods, they all still have the same names. And so now if I go back here, I'm gonna reload our client side. And look at this, Albi pops up. It's asking for if I accept the request from this website that wants to connect to Albi. I do, and then it's asking, is it okay if this website gets your balance? And I can say yes. And then there's our balance. Cool. So the WebLN interface, a little bit different. These requests are coming through for everything we're doing, but a lot of people are used to this interface. Okay, so once again, let's send a payment. Let's try everything out. So we'll have Bob here create an invoice, 50K sats. Let's do it. Big time. Submit, and Albi is going to ask us, are we okay with paying this invoice for 50,000 sats? With our LND node, yes. There we go. It says payment successful. If I refresh, our balance should go down considerably. There we go. It certainly does. Let's receive now. We'll make an invoice for 21,000 sats. Okay. Looks like a real invoice. We'll copy it right here. Have Bob pay this now. Okay, says it's successful. Let's see if our balance updates once again from 134K to 155. Awesome. Sweet, so all of our methods now work for WebLN as well. And it was a little bit of a wonky setup, but that's fine. And so in this scenario, I mean, you know, we connected to our own Albi instance, so our own node, but really this WebLN code, I mean, you can just throw this into your project, and if the user has Albi or another WebLN provider wallet, then you will be able to interact with them, to interact with their balance, to show their balance, to send payments with their permission and stuff like that. So Albi is a super exciting interface. I mean, you can do a lot more with it, actually. I did a previous workshop. I forgot what it was called, but I did a previous one that was a little bit more in-depth on WebLN. You can find it on the Plebdevs YouTube. Cool. And then the final slide here is just, this is showing how we were switching out our imports, just to show that, you know, we have the same functionality across all three of these different interfaces. Okay, and that is it. Wow. So covered maybe a bit more than I was planning on covering initially in this workshop, but we have our three simple methods that are all working here in our pretty simple NextJS app. For talking to LND, and we now have a simple template that we can come back to for anytime that you want to build Lightning functionality into your app again. So it's pretty exciting. So yeah, once again, the slides are right here. If you were late, tinyurl.com, plebdevs LND interfacing, and then also the completed project is here, folks. So if you didn't finish your own locally, you can find it here and just use it. You know, use it to create your own Lightning app. Like that's, you know, it's like, what can you do now that you can send payments with Lightning? You can receive payments. You can show balances. There's a lot of different kinds of apps you can build, and I think that's the best learning path, is just taking that simple functionality and using it for a real use case, and then maybe using that as an opportunity to dig a little bit deeper. So sweet. I can't believe it worked. WebLN was giving me trouble, but you know, that's how it goes. But sweet, thank you for joining if you did. I will be posting this video in a few days. I'll chop it down a little bit. And then, yeah, like I said before, join the Plebdevs Discord. You can find the link to the Discord on plebdevs.com right here, as well as some of our workshops and both of the courses. And yeah, if you are going through this at some point in the future, you need help, message me on Discord, message me on Twitter, whatever. I'll be happy to help you. And yeah, let's freaking get it. Yeah, thanks for joining. Yeah, I think, I don't know what we're going to do next week, but I'm going to start working on a Nostr workshop. Some people were talking about that in the Discord, so we're going to go back to some Nostr basics. Maybe build a simple Nostr feed with Zaps. Sounds pretty cool. But that's what I'll be looking forward to probably next week. But as always, you know, if you have ideas for workshops or something you would like to see, let me know. If you need help, hit me up. The DMs are open. But yeah, thanks y'all for joining. And I'll see you next time. Happy Saturday.